Greetings and welcome to this episode of Everyday Enchantment. I'm your host, Stacey Andon, and as always, when I have amazing guests, which who isn't an amazing guest on this podcast, I wake up in such an excited mood that I cannot wait to share this conversation we're about to have. So please help me welcome Sarah Vermunt. She is the founder of CareerGasm and a best-selling author of the title by the same name and a book called Career Rookie, which just sounds delicious, right? She was the person we all needed when we were starting our careers and we were following all the shoulds. And we didn't realize we could actually create careers that we wanted and loved and felt good. So please welcome her to the show and to the podcast today. We're going to talk about careers and intuition and mixing it all up. So join us now. Welcome. I probably didn't do your bio justice. You have so much. You're career coach, a writer. You're out on national television sharing all of this advice for all of us. And I just adore you. I've been like a fan for many, many years, just following all of your juicy tidbits that you want to share with the world and all the
Oh, that's so
insight.
nice. Thank you for having me. It's so sweet of you to invite me.
Oh, you're welcome. And I love that we're color coordinated. We're in intuitive vibe with each other.
Yeah, we were both feeling green today. I love that.
Love it. I'm hopeful for spring. This is what
Yes.
I'm trying to do.
Yes. Maybe that's what
Channel the warmer weather. I don't know if I'm going to have any luck, but I'm going to put it out there. So, Sarah, I am always so curious, right? Around what, like, first of all, like, how did you get into this whole area of like helping people follow? Like, again, I know so many of my own clients, right, who are miserable. They're doing
Mm,
the work that they don't want to do. They don't exactly know what they want. And they're really scared to take, I always call it like leap of faith, right?
yeah.
A lot of people come and it's like, how do I do that? How'd you get into this work?
Well, the true and very unglamorous story behind that is because I did it wrong first, because I had a
Mm.
really miserable experience with my own work. Before I was a career coach, I was in academia. I was a professor. And that sounds very nice on the surface. It's a prestigious profession. I had to work very hard to get there. There were parts of it I liked, but there were a lot of parts of that work that were very misaligned for me. And so
Mhm.
I spent a couple of years trying to force myself to stay on a career track that the wiser part of me knew was not right for me. And
Mhm.
that led to all sorts of not only mental health issues, but it got so bad for me that there were also like physical health issues. So, like, I started breaking out into hives. My back was constantly going out. Like, I had all of these quote unquote health concerns that were
Mhm.
real health concerns, but were actually a product of being deeply misaligned in my work. And
Yeah.
so, back when I was a professor at a business school. Get this, ironically, teaching organizational behavior. So, talking to people about
Mhm.
workplace psychology and happiness at work. And instead of staying on that career track, I decided to leave because actually I had a mental breakdown. That's what it
Mhm.
took for me to leave that profession. And so, for the past 10 years, because of that experience, I have been helping people leave jobs that feel bad. And I felt really compelled to do that work because I know just how hard it is. And so I guess that's the origin story around
I
career
love
gifts.
it. And it's funny because I've now had like 3 iterations at least of my own like career path. I started in education myself at middle school, not
Yeah.
and but I had a very similar story where I got really, really sick and I had pneumonia and I was out of school and there was this like again, and this is what I can't wait to talk to you about, this voice almost in my head that was like, you're done. You're done. Don't worry. You're still going to teach and you're still going to do the things you love. But whatever this is not working for you anymore. But it's so interesting. And I mean, I was probably, I'm trying to think, in my late 20s, early 30s when that happened.
Mm.
it was like I need like the illness, right? Had or the all this physicality had to kind of come into my field before I really listened. I didn't do the best job when I was younger,
Yeah.
listening to the earlier whispers and being more kind of just in a relationship with my own alignment and my own like what I want to do. It was like totally over, like I just was like, no, okay, well that's one, that might be true, but that's not what I'm going to actually do. And I just found it was interesting that as I've gotten older and I've made some more shifts in my career and in my life, that that I can pay attention a little bit sooner. I haven't
Yeah,
had,
and isn't
I don't
that
know
what
about you,
it's about?
but yeah.
Yeah. Uh, like my experience has been, and this is something I share with my clients too, it's like usually the first step in getting to listen to the whispers a little sooner, the whispers and nudges, is to go through a phase where you don't and
Yeah.
to see how things fall out. Like
Yes.
most of the people I work with, and this has been my personal experience too, it sounds like it's been yours, is like the first stage of developing that, you
Mhm.
know, trust, intuition, whatever you want to call it, is to go through a period of not trusting it or second guessing it, but then like like noticing the consequences, I guess. And then like
Yes.
then you get a little more willing to experiment with maybe trusting it
It's
once in a
true.
while. Yeah.
And you're not, and you know what? It's so funny to me because then I went through like another 10 years after that, or maybe not quite. I went through like a very painful divorce and then another big career thing and a health thing. And, when people ask me, like when I started my own coaching business and my own business, they're like, aren't you scared? I'm like, nope, I'm not scared. I've already probably met almost everything that I'm most afraid of happening in my life. And
Yeah.
now I just want to have fun and experiment. And to your point, you're right. You have to kind of flail around a bit. And maybe not everybody, because now maybe we've done the flailing to help people take a shorter, shorter skip around that.
Listen, I still flail occasionally, I will
Yeah.
fully admit.
Oh, I think it's part of just the human experience. I always tell people that if everything went exactly as we planned, it would be really boring, right? Life would,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have as much fun as like, oh, let me go down this little detour and see what's down this side road of my life.
Yeah.
Extract some wisdom, and then it all creates, right, how we show up in the present moment. And to me, a lot of people say, oh, do you regret or what have you? I was like, do I want to go back and live that stuff again? No. However, to your point, I think it's made my gifts, because I think we're all born with these beautiful intuitive, centers within us, but it made it easier for me to remember and access it and expand it and all of that as we go.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's easy to see that in hindsight, right? But for the
Mhm.
folks who were probably helping, who are working with his clients, like it's so hard for them to access that when they don't yet trust it, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest problems for my clients specifically, like I help a lot of people with career change. So people
Okay.
who are in jobs that they would love to leave, but they don't know what the next thing is and they have a ton of fear around it. A
Yeah.
lot of them are really afraid to invite intuition into the process because they're
Mhm.
almost afraid that it's not safe. And
Oh, yeah.
particularly around career, like that makes sense to me actually, that maybe intuition doesn't feel safe for some people because we happen to have grown up and been socialized in a world that tells us like, you know, making sure that you have a living and have a house and can provide for your family and everything is like the top thing to reach for.
Yeah.
And there are some very real needs that people have in terms of making money. And so, if you're not someone who's used to allowing your intuition, you kind of feel like your intuition has to battle the logic side of you or the side of you that requires safety. And so,
Yeah.
there are some things to tease out around
Totally.
that. It's not as simple as just telling someone to use their intuition, and a lot of people don't use it because it just doesn't feel safe.
I love that because I'm all about safety, especially as somebody's had a lot of trauma in my life. It's like it's got to feel safe first. And I think you're right that I've seen it again in my own work and just in the world in general. It's like becomes an either or. Either I listen to the logical self, right, or the logical path and plan and get, the safety, the physical safety, Or I listen to my intuition and God only knows what's happening to me. I'm out on the street. I don't have any money. My family's wondering what I'm doing. Right. And I think that is, our brains offer us these like, oh, it's either or. And I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but I have this feeling it's like, how do you merge these things together
Yes.
so they
Yeah.
can work with each other? Because I always say, I was like, I would never, ever, ever, not that I advise people, I generally help them figure out what they want, but like, I would never usually go, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Just quit your job and listen to your intuition today and do
Yeah.
something that's not going to, like you said, put you in a place where, again, we're human beings. We've got to live and figure out how to be on this, on this earth plane in this earth school in ways that it makes it better, not it's going to be taxing our nervous system at every other corner.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about that sort of binary thinking that we do around like okay, I can either have a job I pay that like I have a job that pays the bills and maybe I don't like it, or I can maybe think about doing something I love, but I'm probably going to live in a van down by the river. Like, isn't it wild that
Yes,
like those are the two categories that we think of
totally.
when we're thinking about career navigation? And so one of the best things a person can do when they're wanting to sort of develop their intuition more is just to notice when they're slipping into binary thinking. And listen, I still slip into binary thinking sometimes. Most of us
Yeah,
do,
we all do.
but it's really cool if you can just be like, "Oh, the way I'm thinking right now sounds like binary thinking." There are probably all sorts of there's probably like 100 different little alternatives in between those two extremes that could also come to fruition. So sort of just gently noticing binary thinking is one of the things that I have my clients do at first, just to sort of soften the edges around panic that they might feel about inviting intuition in, to not automatically go to the van down by the river
Right.
alternative, and to acknowledge, even if they don't know what those middle options are, to acknowledge that there are probably some other options there in the middle.
It's true. And the other thing I do, and you please weigh in on what you think about this, but I will say to clients, hey, a meteor could all hit the planet tomorrow or today, 5 minutes from now. And whatever we think is actually safe, right? That whatever that job is or whatever the thing is, because I've seen in my own life and
Yeah.
in countless others around me that what we also believe to be safe isn't necessarily always, right?
Yeah.
This fail proof, like, oh, I'm going to be able to walk through life with the bumpers on me and everything's going to work out. It's like, even if you do everything correct or by the book or what have you, shit happens, life
Mhm.
happens, right? And so I'm not trying to put anybody into a state of panic, but I think there's also, to your point, when you start pulling out and looking at awareness around what else can be true, it's also like looking at like what is actual, like, safe. We're not always safe as human beings on this planet. I guess that's my reality or my truth. It's like, how do you walk with that and create a life where that you're not in panic mode every day.
Yeah, because you do need to have your needs met, and we do live in a capitalist society where money is important, right? Like, me as a career coach, like, I definitely have to acknowledge that with people. But you're right, like, safe is only safe until it's not. So there is almost like this illusion of safety in a
Yeah.
way, and an illusion of security. Like, I mean, ask anyone who's devoted 2 or 3 decades to an organization only to be laid off when they're cutting their workforce, right? They may
Yes.
have locked into something that felt really safe, and then all of a sudden it's not. So
Yeah.
very often, people at some point in their careers will be faced with something that um, ruptures a little bit of that safety feeling, and that can be very shaky for a person. Um, and so I really like that you acknowledge that what looks safe isn't always as locked down and secure as we assume it is. So much of it has to do with the way we think about things.
Yeah, because otherwise we're probably not. Again, my kind of area of expertise, which is similar to yours, is the leap of faith. And a leap of faith, in my experience, does not mean you just take this huge gesture and leap. It's like all these little things that you do,
Yeah.
like to your point, hey, let's just even recognize binary thinking. Like that's part of taking the leap, and nobody really from the outside generally sees all these little micro things that we're doing that really set us up to do something like change career, right? Do take a
Yeah.
different path where, again, I don't know, I'm curious too, like how do you work with intuition with yourself, with your clients? What do you do to encourage them to just hear, maybe not necessarily right away act, but like if they're like, I don't even know how to listen right to my intuition because I've been on this other path for so long.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's interesting. There's different points of connecting with your intuition that can trip a person up. And actually, I recently ran a workshop about this. Maybe I'll give you the link so that
Oh,
people
I
can
love
go and
to.
watch it if they want.
Oh, that's
But here's the gist. There are sort of, and I'm oversimplifying here, but there are sort of three different points around intuition where people can sort of struggle with intuition. One is even just hearing it. Like there are so many people out there who are just like, I'm just not an intuitive person because I
yeah.
never hear that inner voice saying anything. That's
Mhm.
often because there's no room for that voice to come up, right? Which might be no fault of your own. Maybe you're a parent of young children, maybe you have a chaotic life, maybe you're caring for someone. It's hard
Absolutely.
to hear your inner wisdom if
And
you
if you never, it never ever like, because I always say as an educator, right? We didn't teach people how to connect. We
No.
taught people how to figure out how geometry, past geometry,
Yeah,
right? Write a term paper, whatever, whatever. And it's like these skills are kind of like in like a box that we never opened. And
yeah.
so I always say, hey, like we're gonna play, but we're also gonna do it in a way that meets you where you are. So
Yeah, that's right, and so, like, you're right, like, some people don't even know there is a box where
yeah.
intuition is, right? They haven't taught you how to open it or use it or to look for it. So just hearing your intuition is a struggle for some people. There's also, the difficulty with trusting your intuition because then there are some people who can hear the whispers and nudges,
Mhm.
but, to my point earlier, it doesn't feel safe what their intuition is telling them, like, they're getting the signals and they're hearing what's there's a part of them that knows what's best for them, but the sort of part of them that is afraid isn't able to get to a point where they can trust that. And then a third area where people struggle is like they know it and part of them trusts it, but they're not willing to take action based on their intuition. So they just sort of stay in this like purgatory of knowing but never doing. And
Mhm.
so for my clients, like we have to figure out where they're struggling with
Mm.
intuition first so that we know which pieces to tease out. Because if you already know how to hear your intuition,
Yeah.
then we got to focus on the other parts.
I love this. This is fascinating to me. I love the way you're framing all of this because it's like, oh yeah, I'm right there in. How do we? I mean, this is my lifelong practice. How do we trust our intuition? That again, we're not going to end up in the van down by the river. I have some ideas, but I'm so curious what your perspective is.
Well, probably
So
the
far,
first.
I haven't ended up there, even though my fear will tell me constantly, "What are you doing, Stacey?" But it's so far, my intuition has worked out, and maybe that's part of it. It's like collecting the evidence of when you have followed, and it has worked. And I mean, that's part of my strategy.
That's a part of mine too. Yeah. So, what you probably don't want to do is make an enormous life choice the
Mhm.
first time you ever decide to experiment with your intuition, right? I really believe in like some baby steps, intuition experiments,
Yeah,
experimenting with it in your personal life before you take a big career leap, for example,
yeah,
and gathering that body of evidence to be like, okay, when I trusted my gut on this thing, oh, cool, this good thing happened. Like, just, and like, I mean, literally keeping a
yeah.
log. Like, I have a
An
book.
evidence log. Yeah, I've done it. Done it.
Sometimes when I'm scared of doing something, I need that to bolster me to be like, okay, when I did this scary thing that required some courage, okay, there were quite a few things that came from that were good. And
Yeah.
also, it can be helpful for folks who haven't yet done a lot of intuition experiments is to do what I call an intuition autopsy, to
Ooh.
look back at past times when you haven't listened to
Mm,
your intuition and
mm,
maybe see if I mean, usually the case is that there was some negative fallout from that. And so just
yeah.
to sort of like inventory what happens when you repress or ignore your
Mhm.
intuition as well. And sometimes, especially for people who are, really logical thinkers, there's something about writing down and having that sort of file of evidence that helps them connect the dots, and make sense of using something as fluid and undefined as intuition as a
Yeah,
potential tool. So it's almost like,
love
here's
that.
something concrete that my logical mind can try and chew on as
Yes.
I'm trying to get brave enough to also access this, um, I don't know, like more undefined part of myself.
Yeah. Well, it is. It isn't. You can't just like, I don't know, look on the shelf and be like, oh, there's intuition. I'll buy that, have that, it's mine, right? It does have this kind of like, again, I don't know, nebulous like mystique about it. And it's so interesting to me when you said autopsy, because I say something very similar. I say M&Ms, which is like after something tragic happens in a hospital and they do these like, I don't know, it's one is more morbidity, more more I don't even know. But anyway, somebody dies and the hospital does a complete, and I say the same thing. It's like you need to look at what has happened. And it's so funny to me. I don't know about you, but the moments that I've been the scaredest in my life to do something, right? Whether it's career or in my personal life, and I'm like, what am I actually doing? My intuition has been the thing that has, like, when I am in alignment with it, there is a peace and a groundedness. Like, I can remember when I left my first husband, I'm like,
Yeah.
"What am I doing?" I was a hot mess. That's an understatement. And yet there was this peace and anchor to like, "No, this is what you're doing, and you're gonna take one step at a time," which I think is also really what you're saying too about
Yeah.
intuition. Like, don't try to do 10 steps or take some big jump. It's like, what's the next little step that your intuition is offering you? And
Yeah.
doing that in a way that, again, meets your humanity, because to your
Yeah.
point, dragging your brain down the highway and the intuition is here and like, how do we do this in a way? And I think what you're saying is a beautiful way for people to work with it, especially if you're newer to it. And it's like, how do I, like, we're all learning. We're like, let's test this and see how this works out, but doing it in a place where the stakes are a lot lower at first. So you're not just like putting everything in a basket where you're like, oh, I don't know exactly how this is going to work out for me.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying about the stillness around
Mm,
intuition and the alignment around intuition, because my personal experience with intuition is that it is very calm and it speaks
mhm.
in few words.
Yes.
One of the questions I get sometimes from people is this intuition or is this my anxiety? Like they can't tease it
Right.
out. It's like
Yes.
I don't actually know what, like, how
Mhm.
should this feel? And, if you're trying to figure that out, if what's coming up for you is a long story or something that's really spinning or feels panicky, that is not intuition. That's anxiety, or that's some of your conditioning that's coming up around something.
Yes.
Um, my experience is like yours, is that intuition is pretty still. It doesn't offer a lot of details on the how, by the
Nope.
way, I've
Nope.
noticed.
It
But
doesn't. So you're right.
it will give you a few clear words about the what, and it doesn't waver and it doesn't spin.
I call it my Wizard of Oz voice. Not that it's like outside of me, but I always feel like it has this like aura of like, Stacy, like some whatever. Although it's always my
Mhm.
voice, which I'm like, wait, this is weird. The wizard is supposed to have some, big voice, but it's my voice. But it just has an energy, like you're saying, to it. And it made me, as I'm listening to you, it made me think of this idea that stillness is a big piece of, like, to me, how I work with intuition. If you're so busy and you're so going, and you're right, there's a lot of reasons why we do it. I've done it, and I'm sure I'll still do it in the future where I don't want to get still for a moment.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you find, like, for example, like in relationships where people jump from one relationship to another, right? Instead of
Mhm.
getting kind of still and saying, okay, what do I really want? And what are the steps that I can take to get that or create something like aligned with that? They just skip to the next relationship and then they're back in what I call kind of that hamster wheel. You had another beautiful name for it. I can't remember. But that idea of like just kind of being stuck in the same thing. Do people do that? I'm sure they do it, right? They just, if they lose a job or they're unhappy, they're jumping
Yeah.
from job to job, maybe not constantly, but doing that rather than taking the time, which doesn't even require any action, right? It's just
Yeah.
sitting in the stillness and saying, "Ooh," getting curious, what do I hear when I slow down a little bit?
Yeah, I love the analogy with dating actually because it's so right. It's like jumping from job to job is just like jumping from relationship to relationship. I hadn't considered that before, but
It
that's
just came to me as you were talking,
it's
so it's your brilliance that
exactly right. Yeah, so, sometimes people will do the panicked quit and
Mm,
just, it's almost like any other job they see floating by is like a life raft that they can jump
yeah,
into.
yes.
And so I have had clients who've had the experience of like jumping, 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 and then finally they get to a point where they're like, wait a minute, this is not working.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, truly, when we fully zoom out, it's like there's nothing technically wrong with it doing it that other
Yeah,
way. It
absolutely.
just takes you longer. It's like a more, it's a longer, more labor intensive process of realizing that there's something missing.
Yes.
And so the earlier that you can sort of surrender to knowing that you need a minute to get some clarity,
Mhm.
um, it will help you ultimately find alignment sooner. So, like, no judgment for people who've done it the other way. It's just a different way of learning. It
Totally.
takes a little more effort. It's a little more frustrating, but you get there eventually.
Yeah.
I always tell clients, before you jump ship, you want to inspect the lifeboat for holes. And so it's an interesting way to think about making sure you focus on clarity before you jump to strategy, because if you don't have that clarity piece, even if you do all of the work to, put a great resume together, get an interview, get the job, get started, if you haven't done the inner work to see if this next thing is actually aligned with what you want, and
Mhm.
maybe you've never actually even asked yourself the question, what do I want,
Mhm.
then the chances of finding some misalignment down the road are fairly high, right? Versus if you have taken some time to get clear on what you want. Now, not everybody can take a long life pause to do that.
Sure.
Like
Absolutely.
usually when I'm working with people, they are still in the shitty
Yep.
job that they
Yep.
hate. And we're just sort of working slowly over time to help them to develop that inner knowing and get that clarity so that then we can build an exit strategy for them. Like, I tend to work with people for about 6 months or so. It's not like a quick one and done sort of thing.
It's funny, I had a client years ago. She hired me to because she's like, "I'm miserable in my job." And so we coached, I think maybe 6, 8 it was a while. We were coaching, and she never changed her job at the time, and then halfway through the coaching, she's like, "I actually realized it's not about the job," right? It's like, it's not about the job, which again, that in the capsule of, oh yeah, we do have to figure out work and stuff like that, but what she did eventually change jobs and like years later, and now is doing something she totally loves. But
Yeah.
to your point, if you're just taking the jump and you're not, and you're right, you don't have to mean you quit your job and you have no money coming in. It's like these things can happen simultaneously. She was still in the job she didn't enjoy, and then having this exploration with me and into her own stuff around, I love what you said. I want to pull it out because I think it's so important. Most people are not asking themselves, what do I really want? Or maybe they are and they're saying, but I can't get that. Other people can make that, but I can't get that, right? And I'm in the business of people always say to me, "You're never going to believe what happened." And I'm going to be like, "I'm always going to believe what happened," because when you do it with when you do tap into this intuition, to your point, you can do it with a lot greater ease. You don't have to go. I'm like, we can go. My intuition always goes, you can go down that road if you want, but you don't have to. You
Yeah.
can skip, right? It's like
Yeah.
my little fast pass analogy from Disney World where you skip the
Love that.
line.
Yeah. I love that. Great analogy.
Yeah, you can skip it if you want. You
Yeah.
don't have to. Again, I don't judge. It's like whatever we're all doing, we're doing the best we can in the moment. But
Yeah.
you can skip that using intuition but it's to your point, there's some belief work too around, do I believe that I am worthy to have what I want, that I can make it happen, whatever. And there's, like you said, there's a world of conditioning and everything
Yeah.
else that goes around that. And I think that that willingness to kind of be uncomfortable or ask questions that can make us uncomfortable, and truths that are like, ooh, do I want to say that out loud?
Yeah.
The capacity for that, the ability to do that, I think really helps us get into alignment. I don't know. You tell me what you think, but
I
that's kind
agree. I
of how
agree. And it's an important question to ask yourself. Like, do I believe I deserve this? And what happens if the answer is no, right?
yeah.
Because for some people, the answer is no. And so then we have to get a little softer and gentler with the questions we probe. And then the next question is, are you willing to experiment with that belief? Are you willing to do a couple of very small, teensy life experiments to see if you can tease that out a little bit more? Because
Yeah.
the leap from I'm stuck in this job and I don't think I can ever leave to I believe I can do something else and I'm going to trust it is a very big leap for some people. So very often there are these sort of in between the sort of bridge spaces where we can do a little bit of experimenting with our thoughts and we can do a little bit of experimenting with action to see what happens when we do stretch a little outside of that regular way of thinking and regular way of being. And it's really cool to do that because you will almost always find, if you're approaching it in the right way, that you're able to give a little, you're able to surprise yourself a little, you're able to shift a little bit.
Yeah, and one of my other favorite things that goes right hand in hand. I mean, you and I are totally hand in hand with this stuff. Is that I don't believe our soul, our heart, or intuition, whatever we want to call it, is nudging you toward right something else, because it says, it's like I always say, it's not getting dangled in front of you to go, oh, guess what? This looks really amazing and you're pining after it, but you can't have it,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's nudging you because it's kind of just going to gently. And like you said, I have gone fast and hard and hustle culture like nobody's business. And the last couple of years, I have had to really kind of unlearn that for myself
Yeah.
and practice the belief that going gentler, going slower is actually so impactful and so I can create the things I want with greater ease. And there isn't this just one way. And it's so harsh. The world is can be so harsh, our systems. And I think that, again, to slow down and give ourselves this, like, ooh, what if we did it with way more care and concern?
Yeah.
Doesn't always feel like it's, kind of bumping up against maybe the norm out there, especially in capitalist
Yeah.
paradigms and things of that nature. But it's like, to me, it's like, well, wouldn't that be so much more fun to be able to do it that way than whatever way, even if it is, to your point, some level of success people have had doing it that way? At what cost have we had to our personal lives, our health, our you name it, all the things?
Yeah. I think you're so right. And that also doesn't mean we have to leave logic at the door. Like, every part of you gets to come to the table, right? And so what we were talking about earlier around the binary thinking of the push-pull brain versus heart, it's way too simplified a way to look at things. And the truth is, like, you need your logic, you need your rational thinking to help you make good decisions.
Yeah.
But when you have it at the table with intuition and you have your fear at the table too, you invite all of those parts of yourselves to the table, then you're going to be in a better space to make decisions. And you make sure not one of those parts, by the way, has a megaphone and is taking over, right?
True.
Because
There's
fear,
truth to that.
fear likes to travel with a megaphone, in my
Oh,
experience.
I love
But yeah,
that
it's a
visual.
softer, gentler way of decision making. And for a lot of people, this is true for myself, also for most of my life. We're not used to making decisions that way, with allowing for some harmony to develop among the various parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So we're going to wrap up soon, but I could talk to you for hours, Sarah. This is fascinating to me. What is the one thing that you offer, like almost every client that comes to you, that's kind of like like the one message, if we could put it in a bottle and be like, this is Sarah's message to the planet, what do you think comes through time and time again that you just remind yourself and remind everybody around you of?
Gosh, this is a good question. I'm going to think about it for a second.
Okay, please do.
Intuition is safe. I think
Mhm.
that's probably the one thing that I help people discover in our work together. And what your intuition is nudging you towards matters. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you could engage with that, but to engage in it in some way is really important.
That's so beautiful. Oh, I love it. Well, I am sure people are, if they don't know you already, Sarah, they're going to want to get closer into your world. How can they connect with you? And I will promise I will put all the details in the show notes so people can get all the spellings and things. But what's the best way to get into your world?
Sure. The place I'm really enjoying hanging out lately is the Careergasm podcast. I'm in my first season, and it's been lovely so far. People can also find me at careergasm.com, and I am at Careergasm on all of the social media.
Sweetness. Well, I highly recommend getting into your world because, again, life's too short and equally too long to be doing work that we don't really love to do.
Agree.
Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in. Get all the delicious details and links we've mentioned in this episode in the show notes below. If you'd like to chat about this episode or learn more about how to work with me, come visit me in my private Facebook group, Everyday Enchantment, or check out my website, staceyandon.com, where you can find out more about my Leap of Faith coaching, my Map Makers group program, and the School of Intuitive Magic. Plus a special shout out for all the production and editing of this show by Richard Wilmore. That's it for now, love. Here's to living a life enchanted. See you soon.